for IFAB Online.
Welcome to IFAB Online.
أهلاً وسهلاً to IFAB Online.
Hello and welcome to this session on fundraising in the Middle East and Africa. As if one of these regions wasn't complex enough by itself, we're going to do our best to offer you some insight and practical tips on fundraising in both these regions and between them. I'm your host, Craig, and I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Salma Danawi Rida in Beirut, Lebanon, and Lily Mabonga in Nairobi, Kenya. We're going to each take around 10 minutes to tell you everything we know about fundraising in the Middle East and Africa and share some of our experiences from both regions and from fundraising between them. In the second half of the session, I'm going to ask some difficult questions and our regional experts, Salma and Lily, will answer them. First up is Salma, who has a deep understanding of fundraising across the Middle East and North Africa region. She's currently leading a $650 million fundraising campaign for the American University in Beirut. Over to you, Salma.
Thank you, Greg. So, talking about the Middle East. The Middle East is a place with a great tradition of philanthropy and generosity, where people care about future generations, their children and their grandchildren. It includes 17 countries, among the richest and also the poorest in the world. It's an exciting, dynamic, and challenging part of the world in which to fundraise. It's a place of enormous wealth. Check Forbes Middle East for more info about the richest people in that area. Let me start in this session about fundraising in the Middle East. I would like to talk to you mainly about three things. What kind of challenges you might face while fundraising in the Middle East? How can you overcome those challenges? And third, I will showcase through my long experience in fundraising at AUB some examples of challenges and successes, especially in turbulent times like the ones we are all going through today, that you might find beneficial if you are considering fundraising in the Middle East. Let me start by talking to you about challenges that you might face in the region. First, we have the diversity. This is a very diverse region in terms of people, money, culture, and religion. One strategy and one structure will not fit all. You need to understand the culture and the specifics of each country you visit. For example, UAE is different from Jordan or KSA or Kuwait. So you have to make sure you ask a local friend about tips before you go to the meeting. Data. In this area of the world, there is still very little data, both about people wealth and also about their giving in the region or giving capabilities in the region. So it's very difficult to compare markets accurately. Also, one interesting aspect and challenge is professionals. There is a small but growing number of fundraising professionals in the region. For example, one of the big challenges that we face at AUB is to find good people to join our fundraising team. Also, we have one interesting challenge, that is the compliance, because the laws and policies on fundraising and NGOs vary across the region and will restrict what your organization can do. We at AUB, we have a very big network of alumni that is everywhere. They help us understand the uniqueness of each country we visit. There is also one interesting aspect, that is a rapid change in the area regarding towards philanthropy. Attitudes to philanthropy are changing rapidly and at a faster pace because of the interest in making an impact. And this specific topic, this will provide nonprofits with a great opportunity to partner with people and organizations that are interested in having a lasting impact. It's all about making an impact, whether changing people's lives through education or increasing diversity in the region or addressing an urgent need arising from a sudden or a challenging situation. Now, let me move to the second point. We discussed challenges. But of course, there are ways to overcome those challenges. Philanthropy in the Arab world, it goes back to more than 1,000 years and has its roots in, for example, we have the zakat and the waqf. The waqf is what's known as endowment, but it's called waqf in Arabic. And the zakat, it's also a kind of philanthropy, but it's more related to religious kind of philanthropy. Philanthropists now are willing to also give to education, health, community projects. They no longer give only to religious causes or close family members. So this is a very interesting area to look into. How do you overcome those challenges in the Middle East? It is very essential that you know your institution, university, foundation, whatever entity you're fundraising for. And so you can speak easily about it. This is very important. Also, one very interesting aspect, before your meeting, you need to make sure that you know the donors you are meeting with. We, for example, at AUB, we have a research team that help us find info about targeted donors and helps fundraisers identify potential ones. For example, the research team might uncover that the CEO at a bank is interested is an art collector. So this could be a great way to initiate a conversation. You might miss an opportunity by not knowing specific details about your prospect. One also very important thing is that you would need to invest in your staff. They need to be well trained. Make sure they have the appropriate info about the country they are visiting, the people they are meeting with, what kind of topics they should or should not discuss. For example, in certain areas, they cannot discuss politics with people while visiting there. So they should abstain from this and they should be aware of this prior to the meeting. So a very important component related to building trust. And I think this component is valid for any fundraiser in any area of the world. It relates to building trust with your donors. People are entrusting you with their money. They need to know what you did with their money in the past and trust that you will do what you say you will do in the future. We at AUB have a very transparent reporting system, from acknowledging the gift to reporting how we use the money. For example, when people donate to scholarships, we make sure they know the name of the students benefiting from the scholarships, and we keep updating them until those students graduate. One thing that is very positive also, and you would need to know about fundraising in the Middle East, is that the needs in the Middle East are enormous. It is a place of great income inequality and of great problems, in addition to being also of great wealth. So among the problems, you have the youth unemployment, water scarcity, food insecurity, poor governance. So philanthropists today are interested more than ever in projects that create impact. And I would like to stress impact. Let me give you an example. The Al Ghurair Foundation in UAE, for example, are working to create an impact in the region through education. After many visits, meetings, discussions, we at AUB reached an agreement with the foundation to establish the Al Ghurair Foundation Scholarship Program. This is still running and successful program at AUB, even after so many years since its establishment. Also, of course, patience is needed. You need to be patient. Fundraising in the Middle East requires patience. It requires follow-up. It requires building trust. The Middle East is a place where patience is rewarded. It's also a place where you can build strong and enduring partnerships. You need to go and visit the country many times. Don't feel that I should stop now. No, you should go and go over, meet people, understand their need, their culture. Another thing to remember, especially nowadays, look for opportunities to be in touch and stay in touch when you cannot get in touch physically. For example, you can send a congratulation note when the individual has won an award or sending holiday greeting. This is very important, especially now. Also, it's very important to know when and what to ask. The time of the ask is very important. You cannot initiate an ask when the person is not ready. He might have other things on his mind, or maybe your institution is not on his priorities. So really the time of the ask is very important. And at least now, I believe this is also something that is very important nowadays for all fundraisers. You need to be very flexible and you need to be ready to change your fundraising priorities according to arising needs, especially in this area of the world. For example, I'll give you an example from AUB during the crisis in Syria. During the crisis in Syria, Lebanon received many refugees. We at the American University of Beirut found ourselves responsible to be part of that. So we moved quickly to help. We established prefabricated structures in the Bekaa Valley to be used as school for Syrian students. Our faculty members and students work with them as volunteers. So you need really to be flexible in putting your priorities and being flexible, of course. Now, let me move to give you some examples of facing challenges and also some success stories from my own personal at AUB. As you know, our university, or you might not know, our university faced an unprecedented series of events during the last year, 1920. There was nationwide protest demanding political reform. We had a devaluation of the local currency. We had the cancellation of student loans by local banks. We had, of course, the COVID-19 and the economic collapse of the country. Last, we had the August 4 explosion, one of the biggest on earth, not only at AUB, in Lebanon, I mean. It's one of the biggest on earth, not only in Lebanon. We immediately had to shift our priorities. We first launched a worldwide solidarity appeal in November 2019 to raise funds for scholarships and needy patients. Despite the fact that our initial priorities, as you said, Craig, in the introduction, we were in the midst of a fundraising campaign where the priority, as you know, we have not only a university, but also we have a hospital. We have the AUB MC Medical Center. So the priorities of one of the priorities of the campaign was to put money, to bring in money to upgrade the hospital facilities. With everything going on in Lebanon and in the region, we had to shift those priorities. So we had to raise money for scholarships and needy patients. It no more becomes bricks and more. It's no more buildings. We had to bring to patients and students. Then, when COVID hit, we had to launch another appeal related to Corona Fund. Then, after the August 4 explosion, we had to launch another appeal, the AUB for Beirut Disaster Response, with a lot of projects related to community service. The three fundraising appeals were enormously successful and far exceeding our expectations. Let me tell you why. There were a lot of reasons for the success. What was most important factor in this success was the strong network of relationships and connections that AUB has established and nurtured in the Middle East region over many, many years. Over the time, we had earned people's trust, and so they responded. We received a record number of gifts. We set a record for money raised for financial aid and scholarships and needy patients, and also for Corona Fund for the hospital. Also, the percentages received were, even from first-time donors, were exceptional. Now, I tried to cover during my talk the challenges that fundraisers face in Middle East and how we can overcome those challenges. It would be great if in the next Q&A session, you could reflect yourself on your personal experiences and maybe share some of the challenges or success stories in your respective areas.
Thanks for that, Salma. Hugely helpful insight and ideas, and sort of really great examples of having to be flexible in the face of some really, really major challenges. Now, next up is Lily. Lily is in charge of Living Water International's Africa programs. In addition to multiple master's degrees, Lily brings deep expertise from fundraising for African organizations from many regions. Lily also brings an example of a long underfunded sector that COVID has pushed towards the top of global funding priorities. So over to you, Lily.
Thank you so much for creating time for this. Yes, as Craig said, I work for Living Water International, in charge of Africa programs for fundraising. In Africa itself, we have 54 countries and the dynamics vary. The East is very different from the West. We are classified to lower and middle income countries. So generally, Africa has a very general challenges. Like you may know, we have high levels of poverty, we have lack of education, common diseases like malaria, typhoid, cholera. But at the same time, we have a population, people are very full of energy and drive. So I'll talk about what Living Water does. And we are a Christian organization, and we are in the water sanitation and hygiene sector. And what we are working for is to help communities, to bring impact to the communities through helping them acquire the desperately needed water that communities have. If you've been to Africa, you know that just to get a glass, it's a privilege. And we have statistics of more than 840,000 people who die of diarrhea as a result of not having access to clean, safe water, sanitation, and hygiene. Now, within the past few years, many various organizations, multinationals, they've done a lot to ensure at least 2 billion people get access to improved water and sanitation. But still, we have 2.4 billion people who still lack access to water and sanitation. And then the very things which are considered basic abroad, like having technologies like being able to flush toilets, pipe sewers, these are not available. So my organization is helping the communities within the Africa. So for us, as an organization, we're in 18 countries. We are in Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and India. And our headquarters is in the Houston, Texas. So my experience fundraising in Africa is it's very interesting. So what I'd like to do is just to classify what works, what has been working for us as we are fundraising in these times. So for example, I'll put the strategies, I'll classify them: strategies to acquire funding, strategies to retain funding, and strategies to expand, and of course, sustainability, because donors have shifted their minds. If you can get a donor and you cannot sustain them, also you're not building sustainability. One, I talk about referrals and networking, which is very essential. Anywhere in Africa, you need someone to give you a referral, you need to network for you to be able to acquire funding. And then you need to demonstrate impact. For example, if we want to get funding from UNICEF, we work with UNICEF a lot, but we have to, for example, we have countries in the South which are working and they're not working with UNICEF. So we have to demonstrate impact to show that, hey, you gave us money and this is what we did with the money. And this we do annually. We have fundraising efforts in every October where we meet and we tell stories of how we are raising funds through stories of impact in the water. So basically demonstrating the before intervention of the donor money and when we got the donor money. Another strategy for acquisition is through effective proposal writing. So we've found that donors have they've shifted their minds, and without your team being able to demonstrate how to do proper proposals, then you cannot, if your team cannot be able to demonstrate the difference between outputs and outcomes, then you will not get money. So we are building our teams, we are helping them to know project management strategies, so that once we get donor money, we are able to effectively use the monies that we've been given. Then I'll talk about strategies that have worked for retaining. One, we've done effective accountability and reporting on time. Once you have the money, you have to really be accountable to any donor requires that you're accountable to the money, you use the money for the purpose you're given, and then you report on time. Another thing, fundraising, you cannot do it. As much as I head the Africa operations, I cannot do it alone. So you need to really have a formidable fundraising team. For strategies for expanding, we really need to continue. It's just like acquisition. You need to network, you need referrals. But then if you don't, even if you're referred and you don't have a good strategy to retain the donor, then you may not be effective. I'll talk about some sustainability strategies that we've seen that have worked. Most organizations, some which I know, some which I've worked with, they have social enterprises. And by having social enterprises, if it's an NGO, you have, for example, a school, or you have a rental. Like I've seen some NGOs are renting out their spaces to have things for wedding as strategies for them to raise money. So you're not 100% dependent on the donor, but you're giving them a chance. So you're using their money, utilizing it, and then others have children's home, they have schools. So by that way, they're raising money as a sustainability strategy. At the beginning, most donors give them money to start a course, but to sustain it, they use the social enterprises model. I also know of another strategy where the women especially have been given a voice to highlight women undergo violence in Africa a lot. And I think maybe even in the Middle East, women undergo violence. And then, so through radio programs, there's this particular NGO which they use the radio program to air out the issues that women are going through, the violence. And then they have a gym as well. So the money that is saved through the CSR in the gym, they use that money to put it back in the radio program so that the women are given a voice. So people have really very different dynamics of thinking of, once you get the donor money, how are you able to sustain it? I'd like to talk about the challenges. The challenges have been so many, but the most common, I'll just talk about the most common with the time that we have, is corruption. While you're trying to raise money, it's sometimes some organizations openly tell you that, hey, if you want me to give you this money, you have to give me 10%, 20%, or else you don't get the money. So that's a very big challenge. And for us in my organization, we do not accept. So you can find sometimes we miss out on things which we can do because our policy does not accept bribery and these types of corruption. But it's a very common practice here across Africa, corruption. And then another thing is there's a lot of politics which is ongoing. People focus more, like for example, in Kenya, elections is 2 years to come, but people already practicing campaigning, wasting a lot of time. So the environment, instead of people focusing on very important things, helping people move the economic income, move from one step, even focus the country, move from low income to middle income. There's a lot of politics. And of course, right now, the COVID-19 pandemic has hit hard everywhere across Africa. The numbers, the beauty is the number is not as bad as Europe or the US, but it has been hit hard. And we know we do not have enough funding to mitigate. So we've relied a lot on funding from abroad to help us just to set up even ICU beds. People are sick with COVID, but they don't even have ICU beds. So fundraisers have really become aggressive during this time. We are asking multinational organizations to help us to fight this COVID-19 pandemic. Another challenge we faced is the World Bank has declared some countries that you're now, for example, Zambia and Kenya, they've been moved from low income to middle income. This basically means the funding organizations, they do not prioritize you as low income. But the reality on the ground, there's no money. You don't feel that there's really, because most people are still living on $1 or less than $1 a day. So there's very high levels of poverty. So if, for example, in Burkina Faso, it's a low income country. Zambia is a middle income. But if you look at the dynamics, they're not so much different. So if for me personally in my organization, it's easier to get funding from UNICEF in Liberia or Sierra Leone than it is to get money for in Zambia or Kenya, because we've been declared your middle income country. So that's a very big challenge. Another challenge is most donors right now are asking for matching funds as much up to even 50%. So you can actually do the work, but you cannot meet the matching funds. So that has been a very big challenge in trying to raise money. Then there's the competency level, the level of education. Donors, for example, the UN have certain templates, which if you require funding, you need to fill in that specific template that they provide. And like I said before, for us, we are training our staff so that they know the basic project management principles, so that they're able to effectively utilize the funds. But generally in Africa, it's a challenge because not many people are able to do even a decent proposal, which a winning proposal, if I may call it. So you end up outsourcing consultant to write, then they spend up most of the money on consultancy fees instead of actually doing the work. So part of the money is shifted. Then there's another problem of the donor wants, they've set the money to do a certain project versus what you have, the real need. So the real need in the community may be X, but the donor wants to fund Y. So people just accept the money just so they're able to get the money from the donor. So that has been another challenge. But we've learned also from donors that they're looking for a track record. They're looking to work with fundraisers who demonstrate impact. So if your organization like us, we are able to raise money because we're able to tell our stories, we're able to demonstrate impact. And then a good strategy is to demonstrate sustainability. So when we are doing our proposals, normally we put sustainability and exit strategy, because as you know, donor-funded projects are just for a period of time. And after that period of time, most donors will ask, how will this project be sustained post-donor funding? And I have to talk about the women in fundraising in my region. Culturally, the women have been marginalized, they have no voice. And it's really, even as a woman fundraiser, you really need to learn about negotiation strategies, because there's what we call negotiation traps. One, the women are looked at as inferior. Sometimes even if you call for a fundraising meeting, your panel needs to have a man for you even to be listened to. So one of the traps is women don't like to ask. And for you to be able to fundraise, you need to know how to ask. And then there's the fear that negotiation makes women look greedy. So this one really, it's just a perception that women have. So they're satisfied with what they have. So for example, if a donor gives me money for money for project, based on the project, on the calculation of the project, let's say I need $1 million. Then they just give you $200,000. So sometimes people end up accepting, then they're not able to do the work just because of the negotiation traps the women fear to ask. So I'm really encouraging women to ask for what they want. And then while you're talking about fundraising in Africa, you really need to demonstrate the need, because there's dire need. And for us in the WASH sector, it's very obvious. And what we are doing at Living Water is to help the women, because women walk up to 1 hour, 40 minutes just to go fetch water. And then while they're going, they're faced with rape. The animals get to bite them, they fall into the ponds and they die. That's time they're wasting fetching water. They would have been doing other economic activities. The girls miss out on school, so they're always behind classes. So what we are doing is to reverse all that, help the girls stay in school, help the women get better economic activities, help the communities improve their status of living, reduce the waterborne diseases. So the women, we've had various challenges, and we are trying to give the women a voice, because now the programs are designed in a way that once they get the funding, we work with government and we work with the church as well, so that once we leave, we sign MOUs with them and we agree that they have to maintain the water system that we're putting up for them in such a way that once we leave, they're able to continue. So the last thing I'd like to look at is the shifts which have happened in the last few years. Of course, the biggest has been COVID, which is ongoing, but for us, we've taken advantage because we're in the water and sanitation sector. So if everyone is campaigning for people to wash their hands, they're really helping us with our costs, because we are doing a lot of water and sanitation, and we're telling community, do not do open defecation, wash your hands, sanitize. And then another thing that has happened, which I consider major shift, is technological advancement. Even in Africa, you really need to shift your mind to online. Now, most of the things have gone online. For example, if you want to do applications, they're online. Opportunities are online. You may network and refer face-to-face, but most opportunities are online. For example, if The UN portal has WFP, UNICEF, and UNHCR. So if you're not able to navigate online, you miss out on that. But the Africans are embracing it, and they're registering the organizations online so that you're able to demonstrate your technology needs. And then we have funders for the funders who ask for a match, that has come up often, but what we've learned to do, we are asking the communities, you can demonstrate in kind. For example, if you're going to use a hall, you can quantify the amount in what would have been the equivalent of renting out the hall. So you can still work with the match. Don't just let funding go. You can still demonstrate a match. If you're paying salaries, what you would have paid the salaries, you put that equivalent in your proposal and say, hey, we'll still pay our staff within the project. This will be our match. So donors also need a lot of effective use of their money. So we are telling people to, once you use, do not misuse donor money. Then another thing that has happened in the last few years is droughts and floods. Then there's also been locust invasion. There's just been natural disasters, and that affects, because when that has happened, the funding shifts. We've had Ebola. Ebola killed so many people. So when we're getting, for us in the water sector, the money shifts from water to Ebola. So these natural disasters have also affected us. And then the other thing, when also the economic ranking, when you're moved from middle income or low income to middle income, the chances of you getting funding also reduces, because donors, they see that, hey, you've been upgraded, so there's no more need for you to be getting funding.
Thanks, Lily. Really interesting, and I think it sort of really brings home the sort of additional challenges of doing the fundraising job in Africa. Now, just a few minutes about my experiences of fundraising in and between these two regions. I'm going to focus on raising unrestricted funding in Africa and some ideas to help you prepare for the experience of fundraising in the Middle East. And then we'll head back to our true experts, Salma and Lily, for our Q&A. I've been working in Africa on and off for 22 years since I first moved from a farm in Northumberland to the Islamic north of Nigeria as a very young, very naive maths teacher with VSO, one of the big UK volunteering organizations. And I won my very first project grant from BP Statoil for a health project in Kano State. I was pretty clueless back then, and my ethical questions about accepting money from big oil in West Africa only came some years later. I've now worked with donors, fundraisers, and nonprofits in more than 20 African countries, more than 20 countries in the Middle East, on a whole variety of projects. Now, the most common question I'm asked by African nonprofits seeking funding is, how can we raise a greater percentage of unrestricted funding? Funding coming from overseas into Africa, as Lily said, from Europe and North America, has more and more strings attached. Every year, there are more hoops to jump through, shilling to shilling, naira to naira. Unrestricted funding is way more valuable to organizations than restricted funding. And part of the answer actually might be to explore funding from the Middle East and the rest of Asia, for that matter. Usually behind this question is a desire to diversify risk, to reduce dependence on big overseas grants, and to aim for true financial independence. And I think there are sort of 5 main answers to the unrestricted question. First, I think, as Salma said, it takes time and trust to raise any funds, for unrestricted funding in particular. There are no shortcuts. Donors need to feel comfortable, value our work, and trust the people and organizations they're donating to. This also means deliberately shifting a donor's stake away from a specific project or program towards them valuing the whole vision, the whole organization. To do this, we need a clear and deliberate donor journey and a compelling case for support, plus lots of time invested in the partnership. And this approach is not without its risks. Second, building on the first point, is the narrative. Unrestricted funding is not a goal in itself. So it's about articulating to the right audiences, i.e. long-term funders who trust us, about what exactly unrestricted funding will allow us to do and what its impact will be. And we also shouldn't be shy and compare the impact of one project against the clear impact of wider support, ideally using the same metrics. Third, we need to carefully consider what work we will stop doing to free up resources from raising big restricted funding, little of which builds our long-term capacity, and reinvest these resources into raise smaller amounts of unrestricted funding, which is an investment in our wider impact and sustainability. This requires a powerful internal narrative and strong leadership too. Fourth, related to the third point, is an exploration of domestic fundraising opportunities from major donors, companies, churches, and so forth, and social enterprise activities, because overseas development assistance is only going in one direction. And as Lily says, it changes direction constantly. And domestic funding income is likely to become an increasingly important requirement from donor governments. Fifth, donors in the Middle East and Asia can offer a different pathway to unrestricted funding for some African nonprofits. As one donor in Jordan put it to me, unlike donors in the UK, we also live with some of the big problems Africa is facing: refugees, conflict. So it is a two-edged sword, as I want to help here first, this is my home, but I'm also sympathetic to their needs. And I think our cultures and values now have much more in common with each other than they do with England or France. But of course, even with a promise of unrestricted funding, it comes down to clear understanding of value. What is the specific value that African organizations with Middle East networks can offer donors? And with funding from the Middle East, and I'd also add non-Middle East, Russia and China to this list, the question is, does our value, what we're getting out of this arrangement, balance with what we're giving away? Now onto the Middle East. The boundaries between Africa and the Middle East are very blurred geographically, culturally, and in fundraising. Commercial markets traditionally split between sub-Saharan Africa and MENA, Middle East and North Africa. And these terms are also used by the big NGOs like the Red Cross, Red Crescent, UNICEF. And it makes sense because in terms of religion and culture, Egypt has way more in common with Jordan than it does with somewhere like Zambia. So fundraising from North Africa and the Sahel tends to be easier from the Middle East. Funding from the Middle East into Africa follows Islam. Zakat, as Salma said, is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Giving is hard-coded into faith, which helps to explain why Muslim donors per capita donate globally way more to charity than any followers of any other religion, sometimes by a massive factor. An example of how this works in practice, a project I worked on in the Gambia a few years ago to build West Africa's first social enterprise hospital was the first time that the Islamic Development Bank had invested funding into a hospital in the region, and they did so to match the investment of the African Development Bank in the same project. And they got involved only because 90% of the Gambia's population is Muslim, and the law is a mixture of English and Islamic laws and finance. Now, if we're fundraising in the Middle East from anywhere, we do need a basic understanding of Islam and Islamic law and Islamic finance. I'd really recommend Karen Armstrong's Brief History of Islam. It's a clear, accessible English language starter. But there are many other resources online that will help you to get to grips with the law and finance pieces. And I'm sure Chapel and York, our conference hosts, can help out here too. My first experiences of fundraising in the Middle East came during my time as Director of Development and alumni at SOAS, London's School of Oriental and African Studies. In practice, much of the high-level fundraising I've done between organizations in Africa and Middle East funding have been made in Europe, in the usual places like London, Paris, Brussels, etc. For example, Mo Ibrahim is a Sudanese billionaire, but grew up in Egypt, in Alexandria. But his foundation is based in London, and we built up a $5 million program from London with MENA money, supporting good governance in sub-Saharan Africa. Since SOAS, I've worked on projects within the region, Palestine, Iran, Israel, Iraq, KSA, the Gulf, and others. And so here are a few more lessons for African organizations seeking funding in the Middle East. As Salma said, personal relationships and trust. I just want to say this again. We talk about this all the time. Relationships are always important in fundraising, but I've never found this to be more true than in the Middle East. Breaking into personal circles of trust can take years, and this access comes with really high expectations, but also really high rewards. It's normal to be invited to major family events. These are sort of whirlwinds of meetings and blurred introductions and handshakes. And to be honest, a lot of this was made much easier because I'm a man. And it's not my place to judge if it's becoming easier for women to engage donors in the Middle East and Africa. But I'm sure, you know, Lily's already shared some experiences, and Salma's going to share some more in a moment. But in the last 10 years, as for fundraising has become more professionalized, I've seen many more women successfully leading on both sides of donations as donors and fundraisers in the Middle East and North Africa. Next, politics and passion. Millennia of external meddling and oil have stoked the complex politics of the Middle East today. And as fundraisers, we can't be experts coming into the region, but we must understand the regional dynamics when we fundraise in the Middle East. There's no excuse for not knowing the basics on within the region: Saudi Arabia, Iran, Qatar, Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, the Gulf states, and alliances with the West and other places. It doesn't matter where we're fundraising from. It's a vital part of understanding the motivations behind regional donations and being equipped to meet and manage donor expectations. Really important. The politics of funding coming from different parts of the Middle East into Africa can be really challenging to understand and manage. For example, Saudi Arabian donations into the Sahel, places like Burkina Faso, Niger, northern Nigeria, and Mali, can be linked to security and education programs. And it's hard to distinguish between genuine major gifts from individuals and government funded because they're coming from the same people. It's sometimes very challenging to manage. Now, language is vital when fundraising in the Middle East. I know a smattering of Arabic, enough to greet someone and hold a very basic, polite conversation for a maximum of 30 seconds. If it goes beyond this, I just sort of end up smiling and nodding. Global fundraising can be so awkward at times. One donor to the Palestinian Museum asked me, how can you be here and not speak Arabic? He was genuinely astounded that I couldn't communicate in what was his world. And he was right. From his perspective, it was weird and disrespectful to come in and talk English. And from my perspective, it was sort of impractical to learn the language of every country I worked in. And this makes global fundraising meetings challenging because we have to rely on those all-important pre-meeting briefings and then later translations of what actually happened afterwards. Now, language is also important because of actually understanding the research and understanding local information about donors as well. I can't stress language enough. Ethics next. These can be difficult to match up and manage. We have different cultural frameworks around ethics, be it in Ghana or Nairobi, than in Sharjah, Iran, or Israel. And given that many of our African organizations receive their funding from Europe and North America, these donations often come with foreign ethical frameworks, which adds a whole different layer of complexity to these conversations. The trust from donors I've worked with in the Middle East often comes with an expectation to effectively and sort of smoothly manage donations through our organizations. Sometimes I've been asked to do some things that verge on the illegal. I remember just after we signed off a scholarships donation from a Saudi donor, she waved me over and said, "Oh, the advert, you must put in that no Israelis can apply for this." And I should have seen it coming. But after another few hours of negotiation, we agreed a format that worked for her, that wasn't illegal in the UK, because it is illegal in the UK to exclude a group. It was inappropriate, wasn't inappropriate or alienating for a particular group of students. Last, and one of the most important lessons is don't take it personally. My most bruising presentations and meetings have been in the Middle East. In Abu Dhabi, I was roasted as part of a fundraising consultancy team for having claimed to have played a role in the organization's fundraising. It was seen as bad manners to have claimed any impact, even though I was the person that drafted the case for support, initiated major donor introductions, and actually asked for every dollar of the $4 million that were raised. The chair explained after the meeting, here, only donors claim credit for donations. Also, this project is deeply personal for us. It's not personal for you, so don't take it personally. So now we're going to go back to Salma and Lily, who are living and breathing fundraising in Lebanon and Kenya every single day. So, Lily, you've already touched on this, so I'd like to ask Salma this question is, would you mind taking a little bit of time to talk about the changing roles of women in fundraising and philanthropy in your region?
Yeah. Actually, after listening to Lily's problems when it comes to women in Africa, our problems are less than this. We still have less issues than problems in Africa. But again, at least from my perspective, there are not many women working in fundraising in the Arab world. But I think this is an area in which women can excel. Again, I don't want to sound sexist, but it's impossible to generalize about what women and men do well, of course. But I do think many women are perhaps better at building and nurturing relationships. Maybe because being mothers and they juggle a lot of things at the same time. So maybe this gives them flexibility while dealing with people. But another aspect, and I call it positive in fundraising in the Middle East. For example, it's easier in some areas in the Middle East where it's a bit more conservative than other places. Women are more accepted when it comes to fundraising from women. There is a lot of successful women in each region or in each area. So it's easier as a woman to go and fundraise from a woman or be accepted in their place and meet with them one-to-one more than men. So from this perspective, I think this is a positive perspective of women in fundraising. And I'm seeing that the number of women in fundraising is increasing in the area. But honestly, more than talking only about a gender perspective, and I would like to talk specifically about the Middle East region. As I was referring before, fundraising was more about, or philanthropy in general in the region has more political or not political, I mean religious implications, like when we're talking about zakat. Now I'm seeing a lot of foundations and universities building on fundraising and making sure they establish offices at their universities for development and alumni relations. This is something that we did not used to see earlier. So I think that this career is starting to gain more attention, not only in Middle East and the whole world, but in Middle East in specific.
Lily, you sort of touched on that the COVID experience has really seen a shift in funding towards WASH, water, sanitation and hygiene programs. Can you just say a little bit about how you positioned yourself for this funding and if you see this sort of bump in income as and how you're going to build on it to sort of build your sustainability?
Yes, so for us as an organization dealing in the WASH sector, COVID has actually been a blessing for us and like many people who are not getting funding right now, because the basics of COVID are how to deal with COVID. Wash your hands, sanitize, and that is what we are basically doing every other day, encouraging communities to wash their hands, to sanitize. So during the last 7 months, there's been a lot of COVID funding. So how we position ourselves, we just look at the donor, look at what are they trying to address? Is it in line with the organization vision and mission? And we've actually received funding because we've aligned ourselves to meet the donor needs and in the end help the communities. So there's been a match. What the donor wants, what we are doing, there's a great match. There's an opportunity for us to continue doing our work. And for us, we are happy because going forward, it's actually the COVID funds, even beyond COVID funds. Most people now already have the culture. Automatically, you enter You have a hand sanitizer always in your pocket. You're always washing your hands. So they've really helped us in our course. And that's what a fundraiser needs to know. So sometimes when you see, not all pandemics, they're actually bad, because like for us, you see it is working for us, it is helping, like the whole world is helping us to preach what we are doing as an organization, telling people wash your hands, sanitize. We want people to get access to clean, safe water. We don't want them to defecate. And you can imagine, like, open defecation. I know some people in Europe have never seen open defecation, but it happens in Africa. So when you build toilets for them, it actually helps. So for us going forward, we want to create sustainability, and how we work with we're working with the church, we're working with government. So even post-COVID funding, we already established, like I said before, we are signing MOUs with the communities. We're telling them, once we put up a community, like a borehole, for example, after that, they have to maintain it, because they do break down. So we have to put the operation and maintenance cost has to come for the community. The government needs to take this up after we are gone. So we really are enhancing the sustainability, even post-COVID funding already. We've set up systems and structures to ensure that communities are able to continue with the work that we've started. The dynamics, like, let me use 2 or 3 countries, for example. In Nairobi, where I'm based right now, the women are very aggressive. There are a lot of bold women fundraisers, and like in the West and South, the culture is very different. Even as a fundraiser, for example, when you walk into an office, you need, first, I liked what you said, because that happens to us as well. You need to know the basic language. You need to be able to at least greet someone in their language, look respectful. So the culture towards the Southern countries and the Western countries, they're very, you have to be, as a woman, you really need to be extremely polite, your tone of voice. So they find the Easterners very brash. I think brash is the word, but that's a cultural thing. So when you're shifting, when you move, even how you dress, because you cannot, if you go to a meeting or if you go to a community and you're trying to explain what you're trying to do, you're trying to get money from, even if they're educated, however level of educated they are, the person, the culture is such that, like example in the South, you have to tie yourself with a lasso. You cannot have a short skirt or tight trousers, like you won't even get past the reception. So you really need to understand the country you're going to, the dynamics, and you may think just because you're in Africa, it's the same. No. You really have to see what the Southerners are doing, the Westerners are doing, and then you really need to also, I've seen patience. Patience is one thing which cuts across Africa, because sometimes you do so many proposals, you write, you go to meetings, you're networking, it's not working. But you need to be patient, because fundraising, it's like investing in a relationship. You really need to build and cultivate for you to see results. Back to you, Craig.
Thank you, Lily. That's really helpful. I was just wondering if we could sort of take the last sort of 5 minutes or so to really share some of the shifts we were seeing in Africa and the Middle East that we haven't really touched on already, or if there's any other points that you guys wanted to sort of expand upon.
Yes, there is a lot of changes in the last 5 years, and for us in Lebanon, there was a lot of changes that are equal maybe to 20 years in Lebanon. Actually, since October this year, in addition to the changes that I was referring to when I was discussing the increase in the need for fundraising in the Middle East, and how people now are willing more to invest in their resources in order to create a fundraising team in universities and in foundations and all of that. And I'm talking about foundations and universities in the area. But I would like to refer a bit about our personal experience in Lebanon specifically, because we had an unprecedented year on all levels. We started in October 2019 with the revolution in Lebanon, because people were willing to see a change in the country. And that was the start. And then after that, we had a complete currency devaluation. For example, a person who used to, for easy reference, a person who used to take, for example, a salary of $1,000, this salary became $200. We had not only the devaluation in currency, but also the prices went very high. Then after that, we had the COVID that hit everybody and made things even worse, and the economy even worse. And then last, and I hope that it will be at least, the explosion on August 4, that was really a disaster and put like more than, I don't know how many families, more than maybe 1,000 families outside their houses. So it was really terrible, in addition, of course, of the people who lost their lives. So those were all challenges that we had to face as an American university during the last year. And those challenges, they pushed us to change all the way we are thinking towards fundraising and the way we are taking fundraising. For example, our priority, as I mentioned earlier, was towards rebuilding the hospital and increasing diversity on campus and bringing more funding to increase that diversity, including a couple of visits to Africa, specifically to Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. And though all of a sudden, in 1 year, all of this has changed. And we at the American University of Beirut, we consider ourselves as part of the community. So we had to jump in and change our whole strategy and change our whole priorities to also be part of supporting that community. So, for example, we created, in addition to only fundraising for university needs, we started fundraising for the community. Our people in the Maroun Sam'an Faculty of Engineering and Architecture, the faculty, the students, they jumped into helping people to rebuild their houses. We had a civic engagement center who worked greatly with the students as volunteer in order to distribute food for people who lost their shelters. Also, we had an increasing need for financial aid, because we had already like 60% of our student body on financial aid, but with what happened, most of it was like 90% of the student body now in dear need, because most of their parents either lost their work, either because of COVID or because of other reasons, or because of the currency devaluation. So it was really a very challenging year. And I think also for the whole region, with COVID hitting, we had all to come up with new ideas to fundraise. And I think even if in this conference, IFAB, it's a new experience, it's a new learning experience for all of us, because nothing competes with face-to-face meetings. And now we all have to improvise in order to still get fundings and excel in what we do, taking into consideration all the problems that we have around.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I think it puts into everything from the session, sort of puts into context the challenges of fundraising in less mature fundraising markets. The sort of the day-to-day challenges bring levels of complexity and difficulty and logistical challenges that I think a lot of people fundraising in North America, in Europe, don't really appreciate until they step into these places and experience it for themselves. Lily, do you have anything you'd like to add to this session?
Previously, I talked about the things I feel like have been dynamics in the last 5 years. Just instead of saying what has happened as dynamics, so I'd like us to talk about, so what do we do? Because these things are like they're recurrent. For example, post-election violence is very common in Africa. Someone loses the election, then no one accepts. Then, like for example, in Kenya, the year was just like a loss. Economically, people are displaced. So funding shifts, the attention shifts. So what do we do? The things like Ebola, which hit West Africa. So of course, if you're funding, if you're in health, if you're in education, or if you're in water, the shift changes to Ebola. Everyone wants now to fund Ebola. Or now COVID is here, there's shift to COVID funding. So if you're someone like Salma and then there's COVID, people are not funding institutions, they're moving to. So what do we do? So what I like to say is to align ourselves to have a wider funding base, so that you don't just have one donor. Because if, for example, I'm reliant on UNICEF, something happens, then they shift their funding, they'll tell you, hey, sorry, this year we've moved our priorities to, or USAID tells, we've shifted our priorities to Ebola, and everyone is doing Ebola, or everyone is resettling people who've been displaced. So have a wider funding base, so that if one of your donors is affected or they've shifted their funding attention, you still have options. And then you need to be agile, because we're in the time of agility. So if you're not agile, your team is not agile, you'll end up not having a match. Like I said, if the donors are asking for a match, think of creative ways of getting a match. And most actually accept match in kind. You don't need to say, hey, we'll not get funding, because most donors right now are actually asking for a match. They don't care that you're in Africa, you don't have money to match, but you need to say, hey, we'll give a match in kind. And most of them actually do accept. And then people need to move with the technological advancement, because that has been a great shift. If you compare the last 10 years with this 5 years, there's a lot of technological advancement. So just train your teams to be more agile, to be more tech savvy, and to be ready to these preparations. Like for us in organization, we've developed a COVID-19 strategy for all the countries, not just for Africa, even for those in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have a strategy that addresses COVID, even post-COVID. So I need people to think about sustainability strategies, exit strategies, what happens when the donor leaves. So even if there's a shift, but the partnerships, forming formidable partnerships with government, with the community, empowering the community to be able to understand that they're not reliant on the donor funding, but they're able to continue post the funding that you get from the donor.
Thank you. Thank you to you both, Salma and Lily. It's been really useful for me, really interesting, and I hope everybody watching the session has enjoyed it. This was our session on the fundraising from Africa to the Middle East and in the other direction and between the two as well. I hope it's been useful, and thank you both so much.
Thank you, Craig. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having us.